Could Utah potentially fall victim to a trap game, and that is in Boulder, Colorado? Could Deion Sanders and the Colorado Buffs upset Utah in 2024? Let's discuss on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you may get your podcast. If this is your first time listening to our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments as well as on social media. We can follow our show on X at Locked On Utes. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by Gametime. You can download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege. That's all caps, no spaces, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. My name is JT Wistricll, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined on today's show by Kevin Borba, who also hosts Athlon Sports All Utes, and for today's purposes, covers the Colorado Buffaloes for us at the Locked On Network by hosting Locked On Buffs. And in fact, if you guys are looking for a second listen every day, would recommend Locked On Buffs. Deion Sanders is always in the news cycle, and it's no exception right now. There's all kind of rumors and everything always going on in Colorado. But I do think this is a team that, yes, there will always be a lot of noise about them. I think there's reason to suspect that Utah could fall in a trap game to Colorado this year. And I know I can already just read the comments and see the future of us. People be like, no way, Utah's not losing to Colorado. Utah will be favored against Colorado. Utah should not lose to Colorado. But if we're also being real, when we look at Utah's schedule, Kevin, there's not many games that I look at and I go like, oh, Utah's like on paper should lose. So I look at a game where, okay, the best quarterback in the Big 12, which I do think that Shedeur Sanders is, with these elite receivers, if this Utah secondary doesn't come together as we hope they do, plus, once again, trap game being a trap game, Utah just doesn't have their best game. Maybe they overlook the Buffs, something like that. I think there's reason to suspect that this could be a loss on Utah's schedule.
Yeah, I think you look at just sort of the environment that both teams are going into. Colorado's coming off of what will be a tough road game in Lubbock, Texas. Texas Tech is always a coin flip. I feel like, especially on the road for a team going into Lubbock, that's a tough one. So just say they lose that game, they're going to be extra motivated because depending on where they are, this could be the start of a 4-game stretch that determines if they make a bowl game, or if things are going really well, this could be sort of, for both teams, this could be a determining factor if they make it to the Big 12 title game. Now, obviously, Colorado has to show a lot to be in that discussion, but let's just assume that everything is going smoothly. There's no hiccups throughout the year. Their last 4 weeks are against Texas Tech, Utah, Kansas, and Oklahoma State. And so it's like they have all these games that they need to win. And so Colorado has a lot riding on their final 4 games. And then you look at Utah, and Utah's going to be coming off a rivalry matchup with BYU. First time they played in some. Sorry, I got muted there. If I remember,
No, you're good. You can keep
BYU
going.
won the last meeting, right? So there's a lot of pressure and angst about this meeting because I think Utah fans kind of see themselves as the big brothers of BYU. And so say Utah wins that big, intense rivalry matchup. Are they going to get up for Colorado? I imagine no team's going to have issues getting up for Colorado because everyone wants to beat the you-know-what out of them. But that's where it kind of could happen, where it's like, okay, we beat our big rival, and now we have this Colorado team, and maybe they just don't treat them how they should.
Yeah, like you said, Utah will be excited to play them, but they also it's human nature when, if things don't go Colorado's way and they go Utah's way, to in some ways overlook and just feel like, okay, even if I'm not at my best, like, we're going to beat this team. We're better than them. And once again, for the Utah fans that I know are listening to this, I was like, there's no way Utah's losing to Colorado. To me, when I look at losses on Utah's schedule, potential losses, because I do think this Utah team's really good. I think they're worthy of the hype. I look at matchups. That's why I've said for a while on this show, Utah could absolutely lose at Oklahoma State. This Utah defense was top 5 in rushing defense. That's not a good matchup for Oklahoma State and Ollie Gordon in that regard. And if the game goes, okay, Cam Rising versus Alan Bowman, call me crazy. I kind of like Cam Rising. I know they both have a lot of experience between them in college football, but Cam Rising is the one with those Pac-12 championships. We're going to talk about Cam Rising in a moment here, or with conference championships, I'll specify. Even though Oklahoma State made it there last year, did not go so well for them against Texas. So I look at matchups and I say, okay, a guy who I think has a chance to be one of the first quarterbacks quarterback selected in the NFL draft in Shedeur Sanders, with one of the best receiving cores in college football. Shedeur, a guy capable of making and buying time, an improved offensive line. Not an offensive line that I expect to be one of the best in college football, but just one that's even improved. I think that could potentially turn into a high-scoring game where the Utah defense has an off game, because once again, that's a matchup where I go, dang, Shedeur Sanders on the road. And I'll also say this about Colorado, Kevin. When you're looking at like rebuilds just over the past few years in general, like I think Jed Fish at Arizona, first year had some positive momentum, then got a big win against UCLA in year 2. And then in year 3 last year, really all took off. It's what led to him heading to Washington. This is year 2 with Deion. He got enough talent on this roster. They're going to take down a top 25 team. They almost beat Arizona last year. It's funny that I brought them up because when that Arizona team was rolling, they nearly lost to Colorado. I think this is the year that Colorado gets a big program because there is a lot of talent on this roster. And I think that could potentially be a Utah team.
Yeah, I think for Colorado, they have quite a few chances to make a statement in 2024. Whether or not they capitalize on those, I don't know. But you have at Nebraska, which is they're one of the biggest rivalries in college football that no one knows about, but should, because I think those two teams hate each other. Like they hate each other with a passion. And then
last year,
yeah, you look at they have UCF on the road, Kansas State on the road, or Kansas State at home, Arizona on the road, and then that full final month of November. Colorado has plenty of chances to make sort of that statement win. And when you look at Utah and Colorado last year, because I think a lot of people are going to be like, and Utah fans specifically are going to be like, well, we beat them with Luke Batari. And it's like, you did, but you also beat them without Shedeur Sanders. And at that point, Colorado's season was already in the toilet. So they had already, at least from my perspective, they looked defeated. They weren't really playing for anything. Like it is what it is. They were just playing just to finish out the season. Coach Prime was talking about how he didn't know what their identity was. And it was like 10 or so games into the season. So Colorado has a little bit of revenge on their mind. I think, like I said earlier, whether people want to hear this or not, Colorado, if things are going right, this could be a game that determines whether or not they're contending. And so I think that's sort of a big high stakes meeting for them. And also Utah is going to be the best team in the Big 12. Like, I think you would believe that. I believe that. So everyone's going to be coming for them and giving them their best shot. And I don't think Colorado's any exception.
They're absolutely not. And once again, I go back to this. Like when I look at Utah's schedule, it's a very favorable schedule for Utah because it's so hard to go undefeated. I can't do that with this Utah team. Even if I look at on paper and I go, well, I like them in each individually in this matchup. I'm like, it's just unrealistic to pick a team go undefeated. So then I have to look and say, okay, what are the most likely losses? By far at Oklahoma State. Outside of that, a lot of these games, you can go at UCF too later in the season. And I know that they got some positive things going that direction, but there's a region KJ Jefferson is not with the Razorbacks anymore versus I just think Shedeur is a better quarterback there. And there's some things with this Colorado team matchup wise that I think present problems for this Utah team. So, and yes, I know Iowa State and also Arizona, those are really good teams. Utah gets them at home. So I'm just not as much concerned because all I've known is Utah doesn't lose at home the last few years, except for when Cam Rising doesn't play and when you get a Bo Nix-led Oregon team. So a guy in the Heisman discussion, one of the best teams in college football. So I'm just not worried about the home games. For you, Kevin, when you look at Utah, where do you see potential losses on their schedule?
Yeah, I think the Oklahoma State one is a good game to point out. I think I'm really interested to see what Arizona looks like this year. Obviously, they retained a lot of people, but they lost their head coach. And so I'm like, does that make that big of a difference? We'll find out. But the game that I would have circled for Utah, I look at their schedule, and I actually, and they're not going to want to hear this, outside of Colorado, because I do think that's a losable game. There's 2 in the month of November where I would circle those. I would say Iowa State, because I feel like stylistically Iowa State and Utah match up pretty similarly. They're both physical. They both like to run the ball. They both, when they're clicking, play really good defense. And then the second one is BYU, just simply due to the fact it is a rivalry game. It does not matter that Utah, I would assume, will be favored by 10.5, 12.5 points for that game. When you play your rival, crazy things can happen. Like, it does not matter who's that quarterback for BYU, whether it's Gary Bohannon or whoever else they got in the mix there. I just think that a rivalry game is always one where it's like, okay, we should beat them by 30, but they're our biggest rivals. So this is their Super Bowl, if you will.
I absolutely agree. I think that Utah should beat BYU too, but just like I talked about this on the show my show that comes out that came out yesterday with Jake Hatch of Locked On Cougars. that you look at like Alabama and Auburn last year. Alabama should have mopped the floor with Auburn, and they need an absolute miracle play because of rivalry games. Like this is where you could throw records out the window so often. So I definitely think that's one where they'll have a chance to be spoilers. So Utah should have a really good season, but there are a couple of games that could potentially trip them up. One thing that will be fun though about when Utah and Colorado do eventually finally face off on Saturday, November 16th is I think it could be a battle of the two biggest names in the Big 12, Shedeur Sanders and Cam Rising. We're going to talk about why I think those will be the two stars of the Big 12 in one moment. But first, I want to talk to you all about our great friends at Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app, they actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. They have great last-minute deals, all-in-price views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Gametime truly takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. You can pick out any specific game and matchup that you'd love to attend and find fantastic deals, like flash deals, where you save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. How about those zone deals where you can also save even more when you let Gametime choose the seats after you pick the section? How about that seat view, a panoramic view from your seat in the app so you know exactly what kind of a deal you're getting. They also have that low price guarantee where Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. So you can take the guesswork out of buying tickets today by downloading Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege. That's capital L-O and all of college capitalized, no spaces, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed with Gametime. All right, Kevin, keeping it rolling here. When you're talking about the faces of the Big 12 Conference, because of the hype that Deion Sanders generates, his son Shedeur Sanders being a good returning quarterback and all the things of that nature, I do think that Shedeur Sanders is the biggest name in the Big 12. Not a shocker. The next one I expect to be the best player on the best team in the Big 12. And maybe best player is an exaggerate because Brant Keithy might be this Utah team's best player. There's a couple guys. Lander Barton might be whatever. But the reason that Utah is such a good team is because of the totality of the team. And when you have a lot of good players on your team, who is the biggest name normally? The quarterback, especially when he has had big and historic moments. Cam Rising winning 2 Pac-12 championships, showing out in the Rose Bowl against CJ Stroud, making that a really good competitive game. We've seen Cam Rising beat USC, beat Oregon, beat some big brands. So I do think he's still a big name in the Big 12. And while he'll be competing with the likes of Noah Fafita and some of these other guys, if Utah has the type of season I expect them to, I've said before, 11-1 potentially, then you're going to be in that top 10 discussion. You'll be one of the most discussed teams. And the guy whose face will be on every graphic with Utah will not just be Kyle Whittingham's, but Cam Rising. So I do believe Cam Rising and Shedeur Sanders should be the two faces of the Big 12 this fall.
Yeah, I think when you talk about faces of Big 12, I think Colorado has more than people realize. One, you mentioned Shedeur Sanders. He's got the watch celebration. When you have a celebration in a video game that just came out, like you're one of the faces of the Big 12. Like I hate to break it to people. Travis Hunter, I think he's also got a conversation, or at least you have to include him in the conversation just for how dynamic he is. And then Deion Sanders kind of reminds me of Kyle Whittingham in the sense that Kyle Whittingham, let me preface this, very iconic coach, has proved a lot more than Deion Sanders. But Deion Sanders is currently one of the most iconic things in college football at this moment.
Right.
And
absolutely
so
right.
I think both quarterbacks have a case. I think Shedeur Sanders has a case in the sense of I think he's more popular than Cam Rising. Like I don't think that's a hot take.
That's not a hot take.
Right.
Like you said, Kevin, he has a celebration in a video game already. Right. I mean,
yeah, and like I think Shedeur Sanders has a bit more of a, I would say, national reach because obviously outside the fact that his father's Deion Sanders and outside the fact that he's really good, because I think a lot of people credit it to his father being Deion Sanders, excuse me. I think that helps. But Deion Sanders has another kid on the team, and Shiloh Sanders is not in contention for being the face of the conference or face of college football. So I think it comes down to the fact that he's he's got his father, but he's also one of the best at the most important position, and he's entertaining. And I think that's where Cam Rising is a little bit underrated. I think Cam Rising is pretty entertaining when the microphone's in front of him. You just have to pay attention because he will say some funny things. He will, at the Big 12 media days when he was like, I just want to beat BYU's you know what. Or I think it was had to be 2 years ago now, Pac-12 championship, when they asked him about Caleb's nails, right? Like, he says things, and I don't think people who don't follow the program don't realize how funny he is, how quick-witted he is. And I think that's why he has a case, but I'd have to go Shedeur just simply off of the sheer star power he has. And I think his offense puts him in a better position to be a star.
Definitely. Well, I even say this too. Shedeur has a better arm. Like, there's a reason Shedeur is an NFL prospect and Cam isn't. If we pulled up Shedeur's top 10 plays versus Cam Rising's top 10 plays, you're gonna be a lot more impressed by the big plays Shedeur makes. A lot of credit we've given Cam in the past is because he makes the right play, the clutch scramble, the clutch throw for a first down. But Shedeur, it's like on the move, fading away, like finds a man, like with pressure in his face. Like, those are the types of plays. Yeah, those are the types of plays he has to make. I will give Travis Hunter a shout out too, because I know he will have a chance to be the second face too. I want, just in terms of, I was more focused on quarterbacks because those are often the face of it, but man, Travis Hunter is going to generate a lot of hype too. So I do think that these two guys, being Shedeur and Cam, will be the two guys who are the most discussed quarterbacks because of Utah being in it, versus, like we kind of talked about last segment, I just think with some of the losses that Arizona's had, as good as Noah Fafita is, I think they'll fall out a little bit.
I think there's, like, you could mention maybe a couple other quarterbacks that I do think have, like, I think they'll be in that tier below. I think Jalen Daniels from Kansas.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, when I talk about Cam Rising on my show, I'm like, Cam Rising may have injury issues, but I was like, Jalen Daniels has played, I think it's like one more game than Cam Rising in 4 years. And Cam Rising's only been the starter for 2 years, which it feels like he's been here forever, but he's only started for 2 years. And so, yeah, Jalen Daniels has not been healthy, but I do think he has Heisman potential and sort of face of the conference potential. And then I also look at Garrett Green from West Virginia. Don't think he gets enough love, and I don't know if West Virginia will be good enough to sort of, because that's the other thing. You either have to be really good or really popular, like Shedeur Sanders in Colorado were last year. And so Garrett Green from West Virginia is another. Those are like the four quarterbacks where I'd put them at the top, and then Noah Fafita right there as well.
Yeah, no, I'll go Rocco Becht as well. I think he's a guy. If Iowa State has a really good year, he's another one that could pop up and surprise. We mentioned some of the non-QB faces. I think Travis Hunter would be one. I think Brant Keithy is a guy who will be up there too. If Lander Barton has the season I think he's capable of, I think just defensively he can get some hype. I don't think he'll you're not touching quarterback level of fame there too. But and obviously Ollie Gordon as well is another guy there. Is there any guys outside of the quarterbacks you think we're missing as the potential faces of the Big 12?
Yeah, I think Dylan Edwards, former Colorado running back who's now at Kansas State. I think he kind of has this like sense of like, he has the following from Colorado, but now he's at his hometown program. So I feel like he kind of has like the best of both worlds in terms of like popularity, because when you're the face, you're popular, like that, whether people want to admit or not, you are popular. So yeah, I feel like that, or Dylan Edwards. And then I feel like there's a receiver or two that we're missing.
McMillan is the one I realized I missed.
I was going to say McMillan would be a good one. I'm trying to think of like, there's probably a receiver that we're glancing over right now, but I feel like Dorian Singer, maybe, obviously, that's the Utah one, but yeah.
Yeah, I think KJ Jefferson, Avery Johnson are the type of, they're the lesser version of Cam Rising in terms of if their teams are towards the top of the Big 12 standings, we will see their names thrown around in there because of the success that they've had. But I think we hit the main one. So, I mean, that's what makes it exciting in this new conference, right? Is to see who are going to end up being the new faces of the Big 12. I'm exciting. And obviously these guys are the stars because of what they do on the field. But the biggest names always attached to college football programs are the constants. That's the coaches. So I want to talk about the Big 12 coaching hierarchy a little bit more here in one moment. All right, as we dive into the Big 12 coaching hierarchy, looking at it for this coming season, let's focus on our, like, I cover Utah. You do Locked On Buffs, as well as, like we talked about, Utah as well. But I think Kyle Whittingham, I've said I still have him number one. Mike Gundy, you can make an absolute argument. If someone has Mike Gundy one, I can't really go against it. Just like I don't think there's a real, like, you just have to have your preference of one or the other. But I think Deion's a much more interesting conversation because you get Matt Campbell as well. Obviously, both the Kansas schools with their coaches have a great argument there too. Where do you think Deion currently ranks for what he's done amongst these coaches in the Big 12?
Realistically, I think Deion Sanders has to be, and Colorado fans are going to be mad. I think in terms of what he's proven, he's got to be towards the bottom just because the Big 12 is so proven. You have Dave Aranda, who won the Big 12. I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago now. You have Neil Brown, who just had a tremendous season at West Virginia. Willie Fritz at Houston, while he hasn't done anything at Houston, he really revamped that Tulane program to a level that I don't think a lot of people thought was possible at Tulane. He kind of had them, if they beat Ole Miss last year and win a couple of other games, are they like a playoff contender? That was the level that Tulane was sort of trending at. And then, it's tough because the Big 12 is so deep with very solid and good coaches. Lance Leipold is good, who you mentioned earlier. I would say the only person that I would feel like 100% confident in putting him over, Scott Satterfield from Cincinnati, because I feel like he's on the hot seat, obviously. Kenny Dillingham, because I think as a head coach, because Deion has the Jackson State tenure to his name, Kenny has 1 year as a head coach. So I think he's ahead of him. And then I don't want to say Kalani Sitake because I don't want to discredit what he's done, but I feel like he'd probably be.
Well, it's tough too because he might be on the hot seat. Same thing with the Dave Aranda, right? It's like it just it's like what they accomplished versus what you've done for me lately are two different things.
I think if you split them up, because there's 16 of them, or 16 coaches. If you split them up into 4 tiers of like, this is tier A, it's Kyle Whittingham, it's Mike Gundy, and whoever else. Like if you split, I would say Deion's probably high tier 4, low tier 3. I think that would probably be where I'd have him, just because he only has the 1 year. And I think that's kind of like the only thing that's hurting him. If you were to factor in his Jackson State success, I would feel like that could bump him up a little more. But the Big 12 just has so many. Like, they don't have Nick Saban, they don't have Kirby Smart, but they have good coaches.
Even like you said, that's the biggest thing and I think Deion, if he stays at Colorado, will continue to climb this list. So let's play that potential game. If Deion is still at Colorado in 2027, Kyle Whittingham said himself he probably won't be sitting in that chair. And Morgan Scalley, just a couple of years in, like it took Ryan Day some time because I think Morgan Scalley has a chance to be like a Ryan Day replacement in terms of keeps Utah in a similar success. I think eventually Morgan Scalley will work his way into being a top 5 Big 12 coach. I think it might take a little more than 3 years though. Could take 4, could take 5. So if Deion stays in the conference by the time 2027 rolls around, I think there's a chance he could be a top 5 coach in this conference by then. Kevin, what do you say to that?
Yeah, I agree with you, but I'm going to take a different position because if he's at Colorado in 2027, that means he's having like a smashing success in my opinion, because I do think, say it's 2025, 26, and we're going to pretend that Colorado goes 7-6 next year. They win a bowl game. And then the year after they're 6-6 or 7-6 again. Like, how long does Deion Sanders get to succeed as a head coach? Like, I think because he's so popular, I think more people will be coming for his head, like fans and stuff. And whether people want to admit it or not, I think pressure from the fans does get to programs sometimes. So if Deion Sanders is here in 2027, I imagine he's in the top 3, like probably in the top 5 at worst. Like I imagine he is ascending to the top of the Big 12. Like that is his potential, because a lot of what he does, and I'm trying to find like an adequate sort of comparison, I would say, and people are going to go crazy when I say this, but I think of Nick Saban, not in the sense of pedigree, but in the sense of like what he does. He puts really good people around him, and his coaching staff like helps build the program up. And like he's a big factor, but he's like the face of the program. So people who go to Alabama, you're going there to play for Nick Saban, but realistically you're getting developed by the great coaches he puts around him. And I think that's what Deion Sanders would have to do to sort of reach that level of success in 2027. Hopefully that doesn't sound too crazy.
I know what you're saying in terms of the staff and the people that are around. I mean, obviously, I'm mad at myself because I'm blanking on his name. His offensive coordinator, even though he did take those play calling duties away from him at one point, is now the head coach at at San Diego State. So what was his name again?
Sean Lewis, yes.
Yeah, Sean Lewis. That was it. Yep. So I totally agree with you there. And you mentioned people putting coaches on the hot seat. This is not Locked On USC, but I just think it's interesting what's happened to Lincoln Riley when he was 1 win away from being Pac-12 champs his first year. Bad year last year. No way around it. It was a disappointing year. But man, you would think that for the way they talk about them for having won a Heisman his first year and made the championship game, like there's some crazy discourse out there, but that's the sport we follow. And it's always crazy when you're covering Coach Prime. And Kevin, you do a lot more than cover Coach Prime too. Tell everyone what you got going on.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll touch on the USC stuff real quick. Paul Feinbaum said Deion Sanders could be Lincoln Riley's replacement, which I think would be pretty wild if USC moved on from him that quickly, because they think they gave Clay Helton like 4 or 5 years.
Oh my gosh, they gave Clay way too long to move on. Yeah.
So you got to give Lincoln Riley, someone who's been to the playoff, I think 3 times. Like, you have to give him more leeway than that. But that's just like my sort of opinion on that. But yeah, I think in terms of where you could find me and just like what I'm working on, I'm over on Locked On Buffs, where I'll be talking very extensively about everything that happens with Deion Sanders, because there's always something happening. You can follow me at Twitter, and over on Athlon Sports, I cover everything. So make sure to tune in.
Kevin, always appreciate you stopping by. Great stuff.
Thanks for having me.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. We'll be back with you tomorrow talking all things Utah football as we rev up to fall camp. We look forward to seeing you all then.